We all need to be very attentive to how data flows around the world and be very thoughtful about how we process different information and how we apply the lessons learned from elsewhere around the world to what we do. We will continue to work with partners and allies and international institutions and organizations as we figure out how to get through today and tomorrow. But there will be many questions to ask once we are through this on how various countries behaved.
The Prime Minister faced some tough questions today related to China and its handling of the outbreak. U.S. President Donald Trump and more recently French President Emmanuel Macron have criticized Beijing's official COVID-19 figures and also raised questions about whether the country acted fast enough and alerted the world fast enough. Then today, China revised its death toll in the province of Wuhan up by 50%. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been careful in his language to date, saying only that there will be many questions to ask once we're through this on how various countries behaved. Meanwhile, one of his own MPs says he wants to probe China's conduct in the early days of the outbreak. What exactly does he want to investigate? John McKay is a Liberal MP and chair of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. I spoke with him a bit earlier from Toronto. Hi, Mr. McKay. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well, Vaji.
Mr. McKay, in your role as chair of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security, do you think there would be some sort of, opportunity to dig further into what we've seen lately as to how China behaved at the beginning of this outbreak?
Well, if it's the will of the committee, I think the Public Safety Committee is actually the perfect committee to do so. After all, it does have a kind of a supervisory responsibility for the RCMP, for CSIS, for all of the various agencies, the border agencies, et cetera, and is ultimately charged with the overall safety and security of Canadians. And certainly questions can be asked with respect to the release of the data by the Chinese government, whether it was a fulsome release or a partial release or a timely release. And because of that, there is an argument to be made that maybe countries didn't react quite as quickly as they might have had they been exposed to the full data set.
Do you have those questions?
I have those questions. I take note that Taiwan, who deals with China on a daily basis, reacted very quickly, and the consequence is that they have largely managed the COVID crisis about as well as any nation. I take note that about the same time as the data was coming out, the Chinese government asked the American journalists to leave. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, all were asked to leave the country when they started to ask awkward questions. Even when the WHO was releasing the information, there was some question as to whether they were being compromised in the information. Even in our own country, as a few months ago, the RCMP came to Winnipeg Lab, which is an infectious disease lab, and removed some scientists from that lab. All of those incidents may be individual and may have nothing to do with each other, or there may be a pattern here that calls into question the role of the Chinese Communist Party in this entire pandemic.
If the committee were to decide to pursue such an investigation, and I'm taking into account here that we don't know exactly how Parliament's going to unfold over the next few months, do you think it's something that could take place now or would have to wait until the pandemic is over?
There's no reason why preliminary work couldn't commence fairly quickly. I expect that the effects of the pandemic will be with us for many months, regrettably, possibly even a number of years. Our relationship with the Chinese government is fraught with difficulty, as you well know. We are in some form of asymmetric conflict with the government of China in many areas, whether it's intellectual property or industrial espionage, their involvement with various labs and research centers, the Huawei decision, et cetera, all of which are fraught with conflict and all of which have some element of security to them. And as I say, I can't think of a committee more suited, a standing committee more suited to conduct an inquiry.
The Prime Minister has received a number of questions following the President's decision to withhold funding from the WHO. The President has characterized that decision and the actions of the WHO as too reliant, basically, on the information and data coming out of China. The Prime Minister has so far, I think actually he was specifically asked today even to name China and has refused to do so, instead saying that, yes, there are questions, but the time for asking them is going to be later, not right now. What do you think of how the Prime Minister has responded to the kinds of questions that you think the committee could investigate?
Well, I agree with the main point, which is that the time for asking questions is probably later. Right now, the government of Canada is really up to its elbows in trying to manage a crisis which was not of its own making. And if there are investigations on the level of government to WHO, I would encourage those inquiries to be started once the, if you will, the pandemic settles down. But insofar as a parliamentary committee is concerned, there are quite a number of questions which could be fruitfully explored. And as I say, this is an ongoing relationship. It is fraught with conflict. It is an asymmetrical relationship that is difficult for Canada, and I think that the Public Safety Committee is well suited to commencing that investigation.
The Conservatives have accused the Prime Minister of being almost unduly reticent to criticize China or to even focus those questions on China. What do you think of that criticism?
I don't think it's valid. I think the Prime Minister has managed the relationship about as well as it could be managed. We are a nation of 35, 36 million. China is a nation of 1.2, 1.3 billion. Necessarily, it's a relationship of a middle power or a middle nation to a large power that is trying to assert itself. The Prime Minister has quite a number of other issues to deal with in the overall relationship. So I don't accept the criticism. I understand it, but I don't accept it.
What's the difference between understanding it and accepting it? Are you sympathetic to it at all?
Yeah, I mean, it does create there is an element of sympathy to the criticism, but I'm not prepared to go there. It seems to me that it's a conclusion before you get to your facts.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. McKay. Pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Vassie. Take care. Be safe.
You too. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.